Hello, everyone. Welcome to our talk on visualizing the GitOps container journey at Microsoft. Let's get started. So a little more about us. My name is Samiya Akhtar. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft based out of San Francisco. I work in the commercial software engineering team here at Microsoft, and this is where my journey with Kubernetes began. I'm passionate about open source and visualizing workloads at scale. My co-presenter is Andre Briggs. He's an engineering manager in the commercial software engineering team here at Microsoft as well. He spends most of his days helping partners develop Kubernetes-based solutions and sharing results as open source projects. So our team has worked on visualizing the GitOps container journey, and we are very excited to share it with you all. So let's get started. GitOps is the idea that a version control system like Git can store all code, documentation, and configuration for a Kubernetes application. And it includes the use of automated operators such as Flux to sync changes to the cluster automatically. Git remains the single source of truth, and Kubernetes being declarative, it tries to match the state in the Git repository at all times. Developers are familiar with Git, and they're able to use their knowledge to modify infrastructure easily. So a very simple GitOps process would look like this here in this diagram. The developer pushes code to their Git repository, which kicks off a CI build that pushes the new image to the container registry for this code change. And then the cluster is synced to a config repository, and Flux is able to pull the new image and deploy the changes pushed by the developer. So what is the advantage of using GitOps? GitOps is a simple mental model. It has a very easy learning curve because developers are making Git commits and pull requests to make configuration changes just like how they would make code changes. It allows for consistent and standardized end-to-end workflows with strong security. It's also cost-effective and improves overall productivity of engineers and operators. Lastly, it also allows for ease in monitoring because there is an audit trail, the ability to roll back changes easily, and ultimately a single source of truth of what is happening in terms of both software and infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Andre Briggs. In GitOps observability, we really have to be concerned with observing and validating your applications that are going to your cluster. Here I have a quote from the CEO of Weaveworks. In GitOps, we must use continuous observation and verification to enable app and cluster management. And in our experience at Microsoft, we certainly believe in this. A lot of people ask, what is GitOps observability? In a typical workflow, you have your release, your observation, your orientation around what you just released, and then you go and make a decision, you act, and you continue in that cycle. In GitOps observability, we're really concerned with the left side of this, all about your acting and your releasing, being able to know how long something takes to get to your cluster, being able to see how it's going towards your cluster are all very important. This is the area that we want to focus on. In the industry, we've seen a lot of challenges around this particular area. All of them deal with complexity in DevOps or GitOps, which we consider to be a subset of DevOps. So, what sort of complexity can we have? Well, the more microservices you have, we see there being a relationship with more complexity. There are different ways you can have this complexity. Organizationally, let's say you have lots of teams working on one cluster. All their microservices are going to end up on one cluster. In the real world, teams work in branches. Oftentimes, you will go and deploy your applications from branches before you go to your main branch. If you're really embracing a microservice architecture, you most likely have many services across many branches. This coordination between developers and operations teams also increases complexity. You can go one step further And if you're attempting a multi-tenancy solution, now you have even more complexity. For instance, some teams might try something like ringed deployments, or they might do some sort of flighting methodologies that will also increase the complexity of how you release your software. This can be something that one should watch out for in an organization. Another thing is around inconsistent feedback cycles. Let's say that you have several teams working and a couple of them need to do some rollbacks. How does that look in your GitOps view? How do you know what's going on? These are some of the challenges that we've seen various partners of ours deal with when dealing with microservices. I'm going to let Samiya talk about how a solution for this might work.
Okay, so let's look at a few ways this can work. Fabricam Trivia is a small team building a trivia website. They would like to increase their usage by integrating several APIs into their website, which are being built by separate teams. So here you can see a screenshot of what their trivia app currently looks like. They have the following team members we will be talking about. Their developer is Danny, their product owner is Paul, and their operations engineer Oliver. So let's see what their scenario looks like and how GitOps can help them. So until now, they had a monolith application, and now they would like to modernize their setup to include the deployment of microservices. So the main idea behind a microservice architecture is that applications are simpler to build and maintain when broken down into smaller pieces that work seamlessly together. So these are different APIs they will be integrating into their infrastructure. Until now, they had a monolith application where they only had a front end and back end component. Now they're aiming for a microservice architecture where each of these teams build individual APIs that are incorporated in their cluster by using their Docker images. This architecture will allow them to have a reliable infrastructure where if one service goes down, it will not take the entire system down because that service can be rolled back and the system restored. It also allows for a better separation of concerns and clear ownership. They will be able to define owners for each of these microservices. So Fabricam Trivia engineers learn about GitOps, and now they are starting to store Helm charts for these environments in a specific folder in their Git repositories. The CD pipelines will generate these charts into Kubernetes manifests, and Flux is running on their clusters, which will sync the generated manifest to their cluster. So as you can see in this diagram, there's quite a few developer teams pushing code into their repos, followed by CI builds, which are triggered to build images. And then they also have a group of approvers who approve changes to be deployed into the cluster using the CD pipelines, which generate the Helm charts. So this architecture has finally allowed Fabricam engineers to incorporate work from several teams together. Now, Danny and Oliver run into a few problems. They're finding that managing multiple microservices pushing into the same cluster is starting to become complex. There are so many CI/CD pipelines, and tracking is difficult. For example, each microservice has a pipeline for their CI, another for their CD, resulting in 2N pipelines already. Developers are also having trouble debugging problems because each service has its own set of logs. Oliver, the operator, is lacking observability into what's getting deployed, versions, audit logs, and has trouble fixing issues if bugs make it into production. So Fabricam Trivia engineers would also like to test their features in a single cluster to cut cost because they're a small company. They learn about the concept of deployment rings that allow multiple environments to exist in a single cluster with the help of a service mesh. This would allow them to test their features in production within the same cluster by setting a header on their ingress routes, and each individual developer would be able to test their features in the cluster without disturbing the default production ring. So here's a diagram showing how a developer working on a new feature can first test their changes in a ring within the same cluster. And then they can advance it to a header that's being used by early adopters of the application. And finally, when they feel that it's ready, they can advance this feature into production when it has been well tested. This feature is called flighting here at Microsoft, and it's widely used in all the teams. Fabricam Trivia operator Oliver is often on call, and one night he receives a call at 3 a.m. He finds that there is a bug in production that needs to be addressed immediately, and he needs help from the appropriate developer to fix this. Ideally, he wants to be able to glance at a page and find out the right contact whose feature recently made it into production. He would also like to know how long it would take for a deployment to go through, approximately, so he can update the customer that's on the line. So let's talk about the ideal solution we can build to address all of these issues. The ideal solution we want should have the following elements. First of all, we want it to be portable because developer teams use many different CI/CD tools, storage solutions, container registries. A tool that can be easily plugged into any of these is ideal. Second, we want the solution to be lightweight, fast, and that can be plugged anywhere by just launching an image. Third, we want it to be secure. It shouldn't require direct access to the cluster and work behind custom security configuration set up by organizations such as an authentication layer. Fourth, we want the solution to scale easily as developer teams grow and complexity increases. Fifth, we want to support different deployment strategies, several environments such as dev, staging, prod, and also deployment rings within the same cluster to cut cost. And lastly, we wanted to help predict time and success rate of future deployments by glancing at a page. Now I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Andre.
Thank you, Samiya. So after learning about what GitOps observability is, what would be an ideal solution, from our experience, we thought of some ideas of how we could solve this from working with our partners. One thing that we created was a tool called Spectate. It's a visualization tool. It allows you to see all your microservices in your CI going from your build all the way to the cluster in the GitOps fashion. With Spectate, you can go and look at multiple applications at once across multiple teams, even across multiple branches and rings, and be able to find out if your PR is being blocked, where it is, and so on. Let me quickly show a demo. So Danny from the Fabricam Trivia team loads up the dashboard and glances at the recent activity that has made its way to the cluster. The image below is a screenshot of Spectate. You see several rows. Yvonne, one of the developers on the Fabricam Trivia team, has created a new build. You see that row being in the top. Some columns are filled out on the left, but several on the right are not filled out. As time goes on and the build progresses, we'll see more columns be filled out. Once the Docker image is created, for instance, the color changes. Once the Docker image in the config has been updated, we'll see that column get updated, and so on. As time goes on, more columns get filled up from left to right. Eventually, what you see is that in the GitOps fashion, the Kubernetes manifests are being pushed to a repository where a syncing agent such as Flux can go and pick it up. Once Flux has picked it up, we'll actually see the Git tag of that particular cluster. In this example, we have an East US cluster. The assumption here is that there is a multiple cluster setup. From there, we know that if we just go and look at the cluster and do a simple kubectl get pods, we'll see all of our applications running for the Fabricam Trivia application. Another tool that we created is called the Bedrock CLI. We actually can set up the Spectate dashboard via the Bedrock CLI. This CLI is a tool for GitOps. It allows you to go and create GitOps pipelines easily and also hooks them up for observability. This way, your GitOps pipelines already have all the information they need to show up on the Spectate dashboard. I would say that Bedrock is our culmination of experience of how to run workloads on Kubernetes from working with several teams internally and externally. Let's go through a very simple Bedrock scenario. Let's say our friend Danny from the Fabricam Trivia team downloads the CLI and wants to get a Spectate view. Danny can download the CLI, enter in some information, and be able to go and get a GitOps pipeline going in just a few minutes. From that initial run of that GitOps pipeline, Danny can go and pull up the Spectate dashboard with just one more command after running the initial setup command. This really goes and demystifies GitOps for a lot of people by going and giving you a booster rocket to get from point A to point B. And then you can have great observability of seeing what just happened. A typical Bedrock flow goes like this. A developer on the Fabricam Trivia team would go and make a code change. That would go to the Trivia app repository. That would trigger a CI build, which would go and push a Docker image to a container registry, such as Azure Container Registry. From there, we might want to have some continuous delivery or deployment. We might want to go and do things such as update the Docker image tag that perhaps our Helm chart is going to use. Maybe we want to go and update a replica count or do some other operational task. If we're doing this correctly, we can actually go and automate a PR that will happen after we go and make a code change for our Docker image. This will be great. We have a concept of something called a high-level repository. One of the concepts of Bedrock, in the Bedrock family, we have a tool called Fabricate, which is built on top of Helm. Fabricate really allows you to deal with higher-level abstractions of YAML and is a great way to be able to deal with multi-cluster, multi-region setups. After this PR gets merged, another CI would trigger that would use Fabricate to be able to go and generate your YAML. That YAML appears in yet another repository, which our syncing agent, such as Flux, can go and pull, along with pulling Docker images from the container registry, and your application starts running in your clusters. So what is Bedrock exactly? How does it help me to achieve GitOps observability and all else? This graph shows what Bedrock does in terms of helping you set up GitOps pipelines, allowing you to see more observability in your GitOps process by calling Bedrock deployment on dashboard. Also shows some commands for Fabricate, another tool that we developed in the effort to have better GitOps observability. So in the end, today, we talked about what is GitOps and GitOps observability. We talked about how we could make GitOps more observable. And then we showed you some ways that we wanted to address it. Thank you for joining today, and we will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
So I think we are answering some questions. I see one from Herman Bankin. does Bedrock also work without Azure? Yes, some parts of it work. The Bedrock CLI right now is targeted to Azure DevOps, but we recently saw the GitOps toolkit by Weaveworks that targets GitHub Actions and GitLab, and I think that we can make some contributions there. But Bedrock patterns in general, you don't have to use Azure. Right? We have it running in GitLab, in Jenkins, in GitHub Actions in terms of doing it, some of the parts manually. So hopefully that helps.
There's another question about does Spectate and Bedrock work well with GitLab Enterprise? I would say the same. Bedrock can be extended to work with GitLab. Right now, it's only set up to work with Azure DevOps repos, but it can be extended easily. It's a very extendable pattern.
I'll take another one. How is this different from release pipeline in Azure DevOps? Release pipeline. Well, in Azure DevOps in particular, there is a they introduced multi-stage pipelines. I think last year or the year before, and so I think that's a very general question. The difference is that you don't have to go to a separate pipeline. You can have everything in one. So that creates a little bit less overhead for developers and operators. Do you want to take number 16, Samiya?
I just saw this one. So this question is, what are the dependencies on Flux Azure? If I'm using Jenkins on another service provider and Argo CD, how much effort would it be to adopt the tools mentioned? So the way Bedrock works right now, it's a collection of patterns. You can build the same GitOps architecture and the same pipelines on any orchestrator, so Jenkins, and you can extend it to use it on Argo CD as well. So how much effort, I would say, is if you're skilled with Jenkins and Argo CD, it's probably minimal effort.
Cool. I'm going to go just quickly answer number 17 from Burkan. Can we integrate Spectate with Azure DevOps? I'm not sure if you mean inside Azure DevOps. Currently, Spectate works really well with Azure DevOps. It just runs separately. And the reason for this is that sometimes you might want certain people to have access. And if it runs, for instance, as a Docker image in the Kubernetes cluster or outside, you can easily control who sees it. But you could probably technically create a web view inside of Azure DevOps if you really want to have it inside.
Yep. Another question we have is Bedrock a replacement for release pipeline in Azure DevOps? No. Release pipelines have already been replaced mostly by multi-stage pipelines in Azure DevOps. Bedrock is mainly offering you a more enhanced release experience.
I'll take number 19. So how configurable is the Spectate dashboard for integrating with in-house pipelines? I'll say it's pretty extensible. One of the things that we really want to go and do is make sure that folks, different projects might have different needs for what appears on the dashboard. And so within your pipelines, you can go and basically, our methodology right now is to send events from your pipeline to a central data store. And that way you can really go and choose what you want to display on the dashboard. One of the things that we're also adding is allowing you to choose what columns to display. Since this is software, you should be able to easily go and change that to meet your own needs. And one other thing I want to say is that we will be sharing the slides. If you look on the Slack channel for KubeCon CI/CD, we'll post a link there in a moment. So that's it. And then also there's some other questions. How does this help with Terraform? Number 20 on the second page. So with Terraform, I would say that our focus has been a little bit more on just the GitOps pipelining. I think Terraform has a huge community and tool set available. Some of the things we've thought about is some folks like to go and have their infrastructure, their Terraform, and also their what we call high-level definition in Bedrock in one repository. This way, if you want to make a change in a GitOps fashion that's across both your infrastructure and your applications, you can do that all in one PR, which is pretty great. So I'll say that we support things like that. Do you want to take number 22? Samiya?
Yeah, sure. Number 22, do you spin up ephemeral clusters for integration tests? Is Flux used there too? I would say yes, we are using Flux in the integration tests, but that really depends on how you set it up. And that's, Andre, if you would like to add to this, I'm not fully sure if I understand the clusters.
Yeah, so this technique is basically what I think Tom is asking, is that during a PR, in order to sort of make sure that everything is correct, you go and you spin up a cluster and you actually do your integration test as part of your PR. No, we don't. In what we've experienced, we haven't had to go all the way to that level of testing, of having to do that. I've heard of people doing that, but I think mostly we push things to the cluster, and then we have basically a callback to make sure that things have reached the cluster, and then we can run our integration test. So it's a little bit simpler, although that method is, that's a good way to do it too.
I'll take on number 24. How does multi-repo look in Spectate? Is it clear what the status is if there are 20 different non-completed concurrent releases? Yes. So actually, Spectate offers you to integrate multiple services, and when you're using multiple services, you could have multiple repositories, and you are having the option to filter as much as you like in the Spectate dashboard itself. So the status is clear depending on how many rows you're seeing, and that you can adjust in the URL itself.
Great. Let's go back up to number 23. Your solution does not take care of infra as code, right? Yeah, I'll say that when it comes to infrastructure as code, you can treat that as GitOps as well. I think that, we're more focused on the application level rather than infra as code, because really in the future, I think that, as long, there are many different ways to set up your infrastructure. In Azure, we have ARM. I mean, there's infrastructure as code as Terraform. One of the things that we have is something called Azure Arc for Kubernetes, which allows you to do on-prem and hook that up to the cloud. And so if people already have on-prem clusters, we don't really want to get in that business with this solution. As long as you have your infrastructure, and we think that ARM or Terraform is a great way, or if you have another way, then we want to sort of get people going from that stage. Because oftentimes in many organizations, the people who control the infrastructure are different than the developers because there's a cost factor with the infrastructure. And so, those aren't always going to be coupled together.
Yep. Number 25, will it work with Docker registry instead of ACR? Yep, the answer is yes. It can work with it's any Docker registry. You can extend it to work with it.
Yep. Number 26, how do you know when Flux applied the new manifest to the Kubernetes cluster? So I mentioned a callback. If you look at Flux, there actually is some extensions you can do to Flux. I think that for Leave Cloud or something, they provide a webhook. And so you can, and there are events now using Prometheus where you can tell whether or not stuff was applied correctly. Just so that, because we have 2 more pages, maybe somewhere we can just go and look at some of the, actually, I think number 28, maybe we should answer.
Sure. So what is the advantage of having both HLD, high-level repo, and manifest repo versus only a manifest repo? So the idea here is that when you write
manifest YAML for Kubernetes directly, you have a lot of room to make errors, and it's very hard to use it in a multi-environment, multi-service scenario. So high-level definition is something that helps you provide that easier interface for writing the YAML and configuring your manifest and not making those errors that you would usually make.
Great. I'm going to answer number 14, which was, there's already integration for Flux and GitOps with Azure Arc. How is Bedrock different from that? So with Azure Arc for Kubernetes, all that does is it goes and you provide it what we call a manifest repo. So this is the Git repository that has your actual YAML in it. Going and getting your data to that repository is very different than what Azure Arc for Kubernetes provides. I'm just going to quickly answer number 34. Does this support Helm 3 yet? Yes, our tool Fabricate, which we do have Helm 3 support. It's in our main branch right now, but it's not in our release branch.
Up number 30, I don't know if you answered that one. Do you have an end-to-end recorded demo for Spectate? Yes, we do. We can share a link to that.
Yeah, we'll share that on the Slack channel. Please remind us if we don't. And we can move some of this discussion to the Slack channel as well for CI/CD. Maybe you see number 31. Are there any reference implementations or workshop that walk through the setup of Fabricate, Bedrock, and Spectate?
Oops, I don't see that one here.
Okay. Basically, I think Jason Haley is asking that. So with so we don't. One of the I think one of the things that we'll like to do is actually give. I think after this we can give a little bit more. We have plenty of internal recorded demos, and maybe that's something we can actually share on our GitHub IO page for Bedrock to give people sort of a more concise understanding. So I think also, yeah, please remind us in the CI/CD group in Slack.
Yep, I see number 35 real quick. If developer wanted to create his own Helm chart package and publish, is it possible using this tool? The answer is yes. You can create your own Helm chart and reference that in the high-level definition repository.
The difference between Spectate and Bedrock, number 36, is Spectate is a standalone Docker image is a standalone Docker image. Bedrock is more of a pattern and we have a Bedrock CLI, which is a concrete implementation of that pattern in terms of standing up GitOps pipelines. And so Spectate is its own thing for visualization and also for visualizing sort of GitOps observability.
Number 32, quick one. Are these open source projects? The answer is yes, they are.
Yeah, definitely. Number 5, I thought I had answered this, maybe it was just only privately, but our thoughts on managing Kubernetes provision scripts, I think that is something which is more in the realm of infrastructure as code, which and we support that. So,
do you have more time, or we can answer them on Slack?
Yeah, I think we're probably just have 1 minute left. So, is GitOps the best way to deploy? That's an opinion. I think that GitOps is really something that's designed for operators, and so if you have people that are operating something and you want to make it really simple, yeah, I think that we can continue this discussion, but I think that GitOps has a lot of advantages compared to other ways. So I think we're probably done. So yeah, we'll have a link to the slides in the Slack channel, and please reach out to us to discuss anything more there.
Thank you very much.